So it is Sunday, May 7th. We are together again to discuss the mental obsession and also the infinite nature of our existence. And given that this is the fifth month, it's the first meeting we have aligned with the fifth step. And the fifth step is about integration, which is integrity. We think of integrity often as honesty. And if we're honest, it is seeing that integrity is about integration. It's about an absolute, interactive, interwoven, present state of inclusion of everything everywhere, that we aren't separate from any of it, that we are actually both the cause and the effect of our experience in our thinking, but the reality of everything that's happening is what we tend to face during the day. So the idea that what I'm facing is only what I think I'm facing dismisses the fact that I'm also facing the culmination of everything everyone else is thinking about what's happening. And that is what we would call our reality. And really reality in that regard is just seeing what's happening. I think the closest thing humans get to what we call reality is what's happening, because it's present always, as we are. It's knowing, since it seems to be doing exactly what it's doing without a lot of argument over it, though the people thinking about it seem to be arguing about it an awful lot, thinking maybe it shouldn't even be happening, while in fact it's always happening as it's happening. And to think what's happening shouldn't be happening is a major conflict with life. And what's ironic is life can't be conflicted with. Absolute, infinite principles as essential can't be conflicted with. There is no impact on them. The only impact is on my ideas about my thoughts about them. So if I'm thinking about life and reality and truth and God and spirit and infinite nature in limited ways specific to my own thinking, I'm not actually even thinking about those things. I'm thinking only about what I think of those things. And again, it puts the weight of that burden that I seem to bear and the depression that I seem to experience and the pressure and the stress and the anxiety and the reactiveness and the impulsiveness and the compulsiveness, all on the shoulders of my thinking, where my head is. If I'm carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders, it is the head on my shoulders I am carrying. And it's only what I'm thinking about that's in opposition to what's happening that creates stress and pressure and this idea that I can oppose it while it's actually happening. So we start a little early to kind of say hello to each other, and we talked a little bit about assessing other people's condition. And one of the points of this integration is to see that if any of us is sourced in an absolute, infinite, unlimited, omnipotent, all-powerful source, then we are all sourced in that source. Everyone, everywhere, regardless of their condition, regardless of their inability or ability to express their own functional capacity. We're all part of it. So to think of somebody else as mentally ill, I would say I'm mentally ill. To think of their mental illness as something so real and true that I can pin the tail on them as though they're the donkey, when in fact I'm thinking about them in ways that don't include the absolute nature of their existence as a primary awareness. And I'm thinking of them only in relation to the thinking I'm doing about them as being something less than that. So that is not them, that is me again in my thoughts causing that problem. So I can either carry the disease, carry the message. What's the message? That there's a solution. What's the solution? That there's something more than what I think, especially when all I think I know is what I think about. And thinking about thinking only knows what thinking tells it. Doesn't know any more than that until I start noticing that my ability to observe my thinking certainly indicates that I must not be that thinking. And I can't be something I do. And I can't be something I have. So if I have thinking to do, perhaps it's my misuse of it that's causing the glaring impression that all that's happening is wrong and all that I'm experiencing is doubt, and it's the doubtful world and the wrong world I'm experiencing, when in fact it's just the world I think I am in, because it's a very little sphere of influence, very circular, vicious cycle of looping thoughts. which I would say are unhealthy. And unhealthy thoughts are precursors of insanity. Because the idea that what I'm looking at and thinking about becomes what I think it is, rather than recognize that if I'm looking at it, it must have had some essence to look at to begin with before I bothered looking at it and started to think about it. And that my ultimate seeing of it is the understanding I have of it as a human interaction. If I'm seeing it incorrectly, I am delusional in my thinking, making believe it's true, making believe it's everybody else or anyone else other than my own thinking about them that's causing that impression. So if it starts with each of us, it's solved with all of us. It's solved by talking about it as something that we all do, rather than something that we each do, as though I need to stop it and everyone else will get better, when I'm forgetting that they're all doing it too. And it gives me a chance to actually see things accurately and realize that the sphere of our influence individually is the sphere of all that can be influenced, literally. We can think about it in shorter terms, and it's easy to do during the week when we've got narrower focuses to pay attention to and have certain expectations that things go our way to get what we expect from those things we're doing. But it doesn't mean that the point of this changes. So in the midst of those things, you can always just realize everything's in order. The law of order within the universe, nature, great example, consequence is nature's enforcement wing. If I do something wrong, I am not going to get a right result. And that's really good information to start looking at, as the accuracy of my experience is telling me how well I'm doing in relation to it. And if I begin to value it and appreciate it, I stop depreciating it and acting unworthy of it, because I'm actually giving it the value that's due, rather than trying to take credit for the insanity I'm perpetuating and think someday I'll be better if I just become more arrogant and grandiose about the ideas I have. I'm just adding conflict to the mix, and everyone's affected by that. Not someone somewhere, but everyone everywhere, and everything too, by the way. Our thinking is, as a collective, if what's happening right now is happening, our thinking is intimately involved in that, manifesting it. And if it looks impossible, it's my own impossibility of thinking it's not me, and it's not where I start, because I think it's where everybody else should be and what everybody else should be doing, that reminds me I must be thinking I have nothing to do with this. Same thing addiction says. My only choice is that I have no other choice. How could it be a choice if I had no other choice? I'd just be acting on it. I wouldn't be talking about it. I'd just be doing the thing I claim I don't want to do and then go ahead and do, knowing it's not good for me. So, good morning.
Morning.
That might have been a cup of coffee.
Yeah, don't pay it.
MK, Gabe, good to see you guys.
Morning. Thanks, Jack.
So our discussion is just the chance, especially in the idea of inclusion with the fifth step. It's about discussing the exact nature of our wrong with God, someone else, and ourselves, right? What would that nature be if the obsessive thinking or mental obsession is the core disease of addiction, which the big book talks about, and I think it's fairly well recognized? What would it be I'm doing, but thinking who I am is only what I think? And that would be ego. To make believe who I am, it's a false image of self. How can my false image ever be true? This is me standing in front of a mirror, telling the mirror to take the clothes off that I'm wearing, and fighting for a whole life for that mirror to obey. And I do that internally and make believe somehow that's a workable model. And wonder why I feel, the depression and the anxiety is a perfect roadmap to what we're doing if we're willing to simply take it for what it is, rather than see it as something to overcome and get away from and feel better than. That's the addictive tendency. We get perfect information and consequence. We get an experience that tells us something's wrong. We feel the conflict, the inner conflict, and the turmoil and the reactiveness and the irritation. We're feeling it all, and then think the best thing I can do is pretend it's not happening. I'm going to think more positive thoughts. What am I doing? Pretending what's negative that I'm doing doesn't exist anymore because I'm going to overwhelm it with positive thoughts. That's exactly what I did with alcohol and drugs.
Is that kind of like telling yourself that these aren't really real thoughts and it's imaginary? Is that kind of the same?
Well, if I was saying they were imaginary, I wouldn't be struggling with them. It's the fact that I think they're real that turns them into this sort of ominous experience that I make believe I need to escape because now I've created goblins and ghosts. Think of what ghosts are. They're basically illusions that seem true. They always seem to be there to kids in the dark and never seem to be there when the light comes on. Think of our own experience that way. When we look at things in the light, they're not there. When we look at them in the shadows we cast, the shadows of doubt we cast, literally in our thinking, we feel anxious, afraid. Scarcity, I call it now. Scarcity becomes the place we live. And what do we think? We don't have enough. Why? Because we're thinking in scarce terms. It isn't reality. You know, humans are still using resources on this planet for everything we've ever used and seemingly owned or utilized. It's all come from this planet. I think we brought a little moon dust back once, but I don't think they've incorporated that into any product yet. I think that's under lock and key. So it's all here. It's all been used the whole time. There must be enough for us to be doing what we're doing. And yet we live on a planet where not everybody is eating or even has clean water and make believe that's okay because my life's great and I'm fine. And I don't think in those terms anymore. It seems worthy of noting that these people are actually suffering. And if I were in their shoes, which I technically am, given an interactive nature, might be worth talking about things that might lead to a collective think that actually begins to address things in ways that are not just catering to people who learn to get worse to get more, which is another form of addiction, but starts to work in an abundant nature that aligns with nature and starts to express our nature as nature rather than something we need to concoct and come up with and, you know, give credit to him because he started this great organization. None of them have worked so far. We're still stumbling. You know, we get 2 years worth of, oh yeah, they're the ones. That's it. Doesn't work. We're fighting against this internal, seemingly invisible drive that we're clearly aware of and don't talk about very well.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. Yeah, obviously you guys see my name is Pierre Dubé. I haven't been at this group for a long time. And about 10 minutes ago, I was hesitant to include a friend of mine who, in my judgment, has been struggling. And I was protecting this group because he had asked if he could be included. And Jack really helped me not be afraid of him, even though I set boundaries. And it changes. I like to look at it like the diamond, and I'm looking at it life through a facet. And Jack just helped me back up, have a different perspective. I have less fear now. I tend to
What was the perspective? You said you had the perspective. What's the perspective?
What's my new one or old one?
The new one.
Oh, the new one is that idea. Excuse me?
You need water?
Anyway, what was that, Doug?
I think he's in the background getting something.
Ah, okay. He had his sound on.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, it's just my new one is a little bit less fearful. I can still engage with him, even though I don't understand it at times. I do understand it.
How about this is the perspective? I think this is what I heard from Jack saying is that it's like, I want to look at somebody else and go, I don't know if they're okay, you know, or put it on to somebody else. I'm okay because I'm not like that. Where really that's what I was thinking Jack's saying.
And let's say I'm a little more sane in the moment, and that's my perspective than him. And I'm going to shift. I love history, and the father of psychiatry Dr. Rush in Philadelphia in the 1700s, he was very kind to the mentally ill and decided, you know what, they may get better if we provide warmth to them instead of chaining them to a cold floor. So anyway, I love being empathetic and having compassion because I tend to try to improve myself spiritually, and compassion and wisdom are great foundations. And Jack just helped me. I don't need to back away from this person because it surely won't help this person if I want to be helpful to others. If I disengage with him, I don't. I'm just less fearful is what the biggest thing is that Jack helped me with in this short discussion the past 20 minutes.
He got you back to the love.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, you never left it. I mean, the idea that we disengage is just a thought because we don't.
Yeah.
And the idea that all we're really addressing is our ability to think in terms that are either functional or dysfunctional. They're either principled or unprincipled. Mm-hmm. And if I'm thinking unprincipled thoughts about anyone, I'm going to help them get worse because I'm going to think of them in terms to help compensate for my own inner frustration with what I'm doing. And the last thing I want to admit is that I want to make sure that I make believe. Enabling is really the ultimate disease of addiction. Because if we are giving people the impression that they don't have what we have, we are reinforcing the idea that they are alone and they are separate and they have less and they need more. And that's exactly what an addict feels and thinks.
Wow.
So to Anthony's point, if I'm struggling with those issues and not wanting to admit it, I'm going to automatically find other people to blame for doing what I'm doing. It may be they're doing it in degrees that are greater than what I'm exhibiting. But as I said earlier, if I'm keeping it to myself and thinking I'm not doing it, that's sicker than they are, because at least they're getting it out and sharing it openly. And we tend to think when people do that, they're sicker than we are because we're keeping that to ourselves. Think about the self we're keeping it to is all just a thought. And how much better are we doing for anyone by making believe that we're better off keeping what we're doing that's insane to ourselves while they're worse off talking about it? Speaking of the fifth step in the fifth month, the whole point is to begin to talk to other people honestly about the exact nature of our wrongs, not about some obscure justification to explain why I'm better than the other guy, but how I can think those things and end up actually replicating in my own experience the exact same thing I'm condemning them for having. So that's the interconnectedness. In seeing it in its totality, we get to see it in the individuality that we claim is ours and realize we're not individual at all. We're just playing games that are either win-win, where everybody wins, or they're win-lose, where everybody loses. Because they're really lose-lose. When I think I'm winning at the expense of everybody else, I am not winning. I am setting myself up for great failure and great loss.
So admission by nature is communicating, talking.
Yes.
So when I encounter someone who is talking, sharing, whether I believe it's sane or not, whether I believe it is coherent or not, anyone who is communicating in any way is literally sharing their experience, their thoughts. And if their thoughts are not, if I judge that their thoughts are not right, that those are wrong thoughts, that doesn't really matter. The fact is there's a way that they are sharing with me what may be their wrong. They are trying to integrate themselves back into the whole by sharing it all.
But see,
it seems to me, just by nature.
Yes. And the idea that we need to decide whether it's right or wrong at all, rather than simply acknowledge it's something they're doing, they're just talking. Right. they're talking. Now, there's a lot more freedom in starting to let it be what it is rather than what we think of it, because right and wrong are just decisions we make. And you even said, I don't know if they're right or wrong, but I would suggest they certainly know it and will know by the product of their actions whether or not they're right or wrong. Because only dysfunction will come from the idea that what's wrong is right, because the desperation that's created has us think from a platform and basis of desperation rather than stability, of knowing what's right is right and what is true and what is real is always the case when I'm not even thinking about it, means that anything I'm creating that gives me the impression that something's wrong and unreal and insane is all coming from my thinking. It isn't coming from reality. Because insanity, remember, is only something, it's seeing and hearing things that aren't happening.
In Spanish, the very word sanity breaks down into being interpreted in English, breaks into two words. Sano juicio is how they say sanity in Spanish. And sano juicio means sano is healthy or sanitary or clean. And juicio is judgment, which means justice, the court system, whatever you want to call it, but it also means mental judgment.
Yes.
So healthy judgment is what sanity is to a Spanish-speaking person. So if I take healthy judgment as my goal, as maybe my benchmark of thought, then whatever I think about what anybody else is thinking or doing, or even what I think about what I myself am thinking or doing, I'm making a judgment. And the question is the judgment healthy or not? And in relation to this integration business, is the thought not healthy necessarily, not so much the word healthy, but how about if I define it, is it loving? Is it a loving judgment? In other words, that am I allowing love to play a part in my view of what I perceive that communication's about?
Well, if you're thinking it's up to you to allow it, you're thinking you're the creator of it. And here again is the idea of judgment is, I hear people say they don't judge anymore. And my question always is, how would you know if you don't?
Yeah, we always
It's impossible. Brains judge. That's what they do. They analyze, they compare, they contrast, they weigh. They're constantly in motion. Even when we're sleeping, they're judging all the experience. If there's a fire, chances are we're going to wake up and smell it, and we're going to know something's wrong. But the problem, the root problem, the simplest basic seed of this dis-ease is the idea, for instance, if judgment becomes reality and truth, now I'm creating contempt, because reality and truth doesn't need my thinking to help it. Reality and truth is an essence that we can't see, but we know, and we can't think of accurately because there's no inaccuracy in it. There would be no chance to try to figure it out because it's complete, it's whole. So when I think my thinking is truth and reality rather than a byproduct of truth and reality, I begin to think my judgment is a problem when it isn't the judgment. It's my idea that it's true and real. That's the problem, which is where the contempt starts, because now I'm condemned to an idea that isn't true. I'm delusional, thinking insanely, wondering if someone else is insane. What are the chances my Geiger counter is going to be very good at assessing that effort? I am doing the exact same thing I'm claiming they're doing. It may be in different degrees, in different scales, whatever we want to claim. There may be some difference in the level that we're doing it, but if we're doing it and not acknowledging we're doing it, what kind of connection and message do we have to carry to them any more than we could talk to an alcoholic who we have a common nature with and think of them as something distinct from us and something apart from us and something that what I have to say will never help? You know what'll help then? I'll never help, because I'll make sure that I continue to maintain the rightness of that thought.
Mm-hmm. I have thank you guys for this discussion. You know, in sitting with this a little more and listening to you guys, I just realized that I grew up with a father. I'm going to revert this to maybe an inner trauma from childhood, a father who hurt us. And my father went to prison for shooting someone when I was 18, and I'm the oldest of four. And so therefore, maybe part of this is I dealt with trauma. And even people have said you might struggle with dealing with this mentally ill people at times because it's unsafe.
Well, or I would suggest you
Go
want the perspective of education they're offering. You're asking for the opportunity to begin to deal with your trauma by seeing others, and they offer you the perspective, and you can better see when you connect with some. We're already all connected and we all have great perspective, but we don't use it. We think of it as something we need to stay away from, the same way we think of it as the feelings we have we need to get over and run from and be compulsive about or reactive to.
Good point. Yeah, I did some EMDR recently for the first time with a psychotherapist about a different topic.
Is that an oil change or something? EMDR?
Have you
I have never heard the term.
Okay. It's where they guide you. It's like they guide you through a particular trauma.
Right.
And I'm forgetting the word. Anyway, it's an effective technique in helping people deal directly with a particular traumatic topic or issue in their lives.
Yeah.
And so it's what you just said, don't avoid it. This is an opportunity to grow and process.
We're never avoiding it. We're just choosing whether we're going to face it or ignore it.
Yeah.
That's it. And if we pretend we can ignore it, we're going to suffer the consequences of that ignorance, because the basis of our thinking is going to be constantly trying to dodge itself with the idea that somehow it can avoid it, while it's in fact impacted by it all the time. Mm-hmm. That's, again, insanity, Douglas, to your point, is once you get the thinking going, all of those thoughts that we have about what's right and wrong out there are thoughts we're having. It has nothing to do with what's going on out there, because nothing in the universe is right or wrong. It just is. It's just happening. Mm-hmm. Atoms aren't saying, boy, I really fucked up today. They just are atoms, and they're interacting with things as they come. They do what they are designed to do in relation to it perfectly. And yet we think we're superior because we have choice, and choice has been now used, self-determination, all this opportunity we have to actually have free will and think for ourselves. We've actually turned into a crisis of our own internal making that's caused suicide to be at all-time highs right now in almost every category, if not all. Addiction to be at categories. Countries are being overrun by cartels feeding cocaine users in the United States. We don't talk about that. We talk about what's wrong with Mexico. We don't talk about our own use, our own drinking, all those things. Why is it people seem to need some alternate form of reality or experience if it weren't something that was so depressing and so demoralizing and so consistently doubtful in their own experience that they can think of nothing else to do but try to escape it artificially? I would call this early artificial intelligence. Is all this craziness we develop to try to avoid things in the name of thinking we're getting away from it, when the idea of getting away from something's impossible when your brain always goes wherever you go. And even the idea that we're getting away from it only fuels it, because now we think we've got some new techniques that's delusional. And I'm going to really keep this one to myself because I'd be afraid to even admit what I'm thinking because it's so off the wall, literally on the floor, like most people tend to get when they overdose and use. And yet we don't talk about it as this gnawing. We talk about it as this gnawing thing. And I think we talk about it by always wanting to feel better. Isn't it interesting that people don't tend to have a goal of feeling worse and thinking more negative thoughts? It's interesting. That must mean they feel worse and are having and entertaining negative thoughts. So the idea of positive thinking is trying to outrun this thing while you're ignoring the thing you're trying to outrun. There's no way to do it enough. It has an impact, certainly, to engage with negative thoughts and think they're real, again, this is the problem, is making believe those thoughts are real. It's where this all starts to go haywire because we think of it as something happening to us rather than being caused by us. If I set my car up to run me over, certainly it's not the car's fault. I could blame it and say this car just keeps running me over. Every time I get out and it's moving and I jump in front of it, it keeps running me over. We want to pretend we're not responsible, which is the addictive tendency, rather than claim the absolute responsibility, which means we are never irresponsible. We are responsible for the irresponsibility of the actions and thoughts we take. And thoughts are actions. So think of that. If the primary action we take is thinking, and that action is contrary, that's why we have been told to take contrary action in sobriety. We've already stopped drinking and using, and we're still told to take contrary action, which is an admission we know the thinking we're doing is contrary. Because if I was taking contrary action to healthy thoughts, and Bill talks about unhealthy and healthy thoughts that are a little subtler form of insanity or sanity, either way. If I was acting unhealthy thoughts and acting contrarily, I would be doing things wrong in relation to what was right. So I'm not being asked to act contrary to anything other than contrary thinking, which is another example of how we're not dealing with the contrary thinking, but thinking all I need to do. And we're not seeing that the contrary thinking is an action that we're trying to do by acting better, by acting the opposite of what we would otherwise do, which is trying to correct the thinking by avoiding it, rather than saying, what's the thinking I'm doing that's so wrong that I keep wanting to do wrong? What would that be? I would say wrong thinking. Pretty clear. Doesn't have to be, you don't need to create a 300-page thesis on that to notice that when I feel wrong, I'm probably thinking something that's wrong. And when I feel bad, I'm probably thinking something that's bad. And when I feel worse, I'm probably thinking worse than I was just feeling when I thought I was feeling better. Period. Not too complicated. It's pretty immediate. It's consequence right in our face all the time. It's our experience always available. And I want to address something else, Pierre, that you brought up. Most people struggling from severe mental illness have had highly traumatic episodes in their life. I have a friend who witnessed his father kill himself and then his brother shoot himself when he was a kid, right? Those are not things that, if it's difficult enough for us to learn how to do the dishes and make the bed, right? Or go to the bathroom in a toilet, which takes a year to figure out. Imagine witnessing somebody that seems as close as you could ever be to somebody all of a sudden blow their brains out in front of you. It's probably hard to make sense of. Now, my contention is if you try to make sense of something like that, you're insane to even try because it doesn't make any sense. So that's one gap in the game of what we try to do. We try to come to terms with it when the terms are, that's insane. Let's start there. So if I'm going to try to make sense of it and be reasonable about it, I'm being reasonable and irrational about it to begin with. And I am going to loop that thing over and over and over again, trying to resolve it while I'm the one, again, complicating it. It's over. What's happened has happened, by the way. This moment is the sum total of everything that's ever happened for everyone that's happening and everything that's happening right now. Everything, everywhere is connected to this moment. And that is always true. That is always accurate. So there's absolute assurance as a basis of awareness rather than what I think should be happening and why things aren't happening the way I thought they should be happening and why people aren't doing what I thought they were doing and what they said they do and I told them to do and they're still not doing it. Much different experience. Now, certainly those people and those things are doing exactly what they're doing while I'm thinking they shouldn't be doing what they're doing and things shouldn't be happening the way they're happening. Where's the source of that problem? My thinking. So another point that, did you ever read Dianetics, Pierre?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not hearing you. Oh, no. Okay.
No.
I read it in early sobriety because a friend of mine is a lifelong Scientologist. And I actually thought it was very well written and really dealt with this point. Mm-hmm. Because all it was about was having people tell their stories about their pain. Mm-hmm. And as they told the story, the story wore thin.
Mm.
So when I'm telling stories in my own thinking and thinking I need to keep them to myself, I am getting better and better at being worse and being insane. And thinking that what I'm struggling with isn't happening now is one way of making believe it's impossible for me to do anything about it because it was something that happened then, when in fact the impact of that, the consequence of that is always in the present. So what happens, as in Dianetics, people told their story over and over again. The whole advent of Scientology came from L. Ron Hubbard he was taking these people through this process, and all of a sudden people were having experiences of having lived other lives. Because all of a sudden their preoccupation wasn't in this immediate struggle of what they thought wasn't here, and they were witnessing a present that gave them a sense of clarity that had them become aware of things they'd always known or always sensed they do, but just had never bothered to see. Now, clearly, there's a lot of healing in that to make believe that all of a sudden all we are is what we think we can't handle and can't fix because we're thinking about it as something that happened back then rather than something happening now. And I would say nothing is ever happening back then because there is no back then for things to happen in. They all happen here in the past. They all happen in our brains in the present or in the future. They're just thoughts. If I'm treating it as something happening now, I can begin seeing that I'm the one reinforcing the trauma by creating a present traumatic stress over thinking it's somewhere else rather than where I am right now. And all of a sudden, I get to be in the seat of responsibility aligned with the natural responsibility rather than responsible, once again, for the irresponsibility of reinforcing ideas that are no longer even happening, circumstances that are no longer even happening, and my ideas about them. I become and start operating on the basis of, oh, it's what I'm doing now. And I would suggest that's all we ever struggle from, is the idea that what's happening now isn't happening or shouldn't be happening, when in fact it's always happening as it's happening, and it doesn't take my opinion for that to be happening at all. So if I start there now, I can create opinions and see them as distinct from all that rather than the creators and the necessity of all that to be doing what I think it should be doing. The idea of manifestation starts to become apparent. And it's easy to see we can continue to make messes to help stabilize, to help maintain the destabilized thinking we're doing, to make believe that it's out there. It's in the world. The world's impossible. People are impossible. The world's difficult. Life is hard. None of those things are true at all. Life isn't hard. Life's been doing what life has been doing for billions of years, at least in our solar system. And it appears it may be doing it in billions and trillions of other solar systems. So that isn't too hard to come to terms with. It's just preposterous that we would make believe that simply because we concluded something was true and real, that that's it, it's truth, it's reality, and wonder why we're struggling with truth and reality and life. It isn't our life we're struggling with, it's our thoughts about it that we're struggling with. It's not people we're struggling with, it's what we think about them. It's not our self, it's the fact that we think there's a self to struggle with that we're struggling with. It's only thinking about thinking that gives us the impression. All we're doing is thinking about our behaviors and what other people think. It's interesting when we begin to think our thinking is who we are, two things happen immediately. We're pretty sure we shouldn't be where we are. So we need to be with someone else, somewhere else, with more or less of something else, right? While in fact, we're exactly where we are with everything. All right. So if everything isn't enough, pretty good chance we're never going to find it anywhere else. The other thing that happens is that we start becoming keenly aware of what we think other people are thinking about us. And every gesture and every glance and every look away and everything that happens all of a sudden takes on this whole storyline about what they're thinking about us, including starting to hate people for what we think they're thinking, and start to think, well, I don't even want to hang around them anymore. They're toxic. Where the toxicity is being created in my own experience, I'm going to find it elsewhere to place, because insanity certainly isn't going to be sane enough to say, it's me. Somebody once said, if you go into a mental ward and say, I'm insane, they say, come back when you're not. Because if you have the insight to know it, you obviously are sane enough to recognize it. That sort of puts us in the driver's seat of realizing that we're probably through our entire life going to entertain ideas that aren't true. And the question is, how long are we going to ride that train before we simply realize it's a conclusion of thought, serving thought, which would be self-serving thought, of a self-centered, which is really just a thought centered in thought. We think self-centeredness is who we are. It isn't. It's just a thought centered in thought that we make believe is who we are. Why would we be centered? It's the furthest point from the edge, where the whole premise of our existence would be completely undermined by the fact that there's more beyond that edge. And yet when we're in it, we think the edge of those limits is in fact the definition of our totality, our reality, our truth. And it isn't. It's just an idea. The edge of every thought is the beginning of everything else, not the end of anything. It's where all things begin. And the irony is, so too within the thought, that essence is always there too. It's just the preponderance of our attention being focused on what we're thinking gives us the impression that our limited thoughts are exclusive from the rest of it, which is impossible if it's infinite, because that would mean it wasn't infinite. It would mean my single thought thinking of itself would actually completely devoid truth and reality. That's a pretty big leap.
So
It's like being God. It's the thought that we're God.
Exactly. And my suspicion is most of humanity has been praying to ego, because it's generally asking for what we don't have. And if we already have anything, why would we ask if we didn't think we don't? That would be insane. Trying to fix problems that we don't see as good examples of what we're doing, we see as things happening to us. Their effects not having anything to do with us, as though we're not the cause of those effects.
sat on 1,000 bar stools in 1,000 insane asylums with flashing lights out in front and big mirrors behind the bar, telling my story over and over and over again, like the guy in the Dianetics example, and hoping for, deep down inside, I think I hope somebody next to me would go, "You're insane." But instead, people went, "Yeah, I know exactly what you mean." And they helped support my insane thinking.
It's your
And-
co-conspirators.
My co-conspirators, right. And I sought them out. And when I found good ones, I went back to them, and we sat on the same stools in a row. Yeah.
So think
you're
of that.
very-
Think of that during sobriety, Douglas.
Yeah.
Think of it during sobriety. Think of the potential we have to actually, in any way I think a thought is true, anyone who doesn't think that thought is an enemy and attacking me.
Right.
And
And
I
so-
start, even more than that, I start thinking my own thoughts are attacking me. Anthony used to use the term intrusive thoughts. I think my thoughts have legs and arms of their own. They have their own volition. They have their own self-will. And they've just gotten up today and said, "You know what? I'm going to fuck with this guy." Not true at all.
So we're talking about consequences being natural in nature.
Yes.
This happens, then that happens. That's the way
Yes.
it goes.
Yes.
And so
Karma is immediate.
eventually all the circumstances and consequences bear down on me, and I wind up trying to go through this process of adopting these steps. And I get to this fifth step, and I bring my story instead of to the bar stool. I bring my story to this sausage maker that says, "Give me your story now. Break it down. What happened? What really happened? How were you affected?" And we go through this process of that fourth step, and then I spill the whole thing as clearly and as truthfully related as I can at that moment. And another person listens to it, another person with the intent of being helpful, not with the intent of conspiring to keep me in insanity. And then suggest that I offer it up to the ultimate truth and love and see how that balloon flies. And I get a different perspective on my story. I come out the other side of that fifth step with a different view of the same story that I just told a couple hours ago.
Yeah.
Looks completely ridiculous now. And I see that actually there was wrong thinking. So I bring what I think is my practiced and tried and true story that's so true and so real for me, or that I hope you believe is, and I bring that forward, and it crumbles. It falls apart under the scrutiny of how does this fit into the reality of everything? It doesn't. It doesn't fit in. It doesn't integrate. And so as it crumbles apart, and I watched my life, I sat there and looked at my life going, but I've got 100 stories on this list. You mean we're going to do this with everyone? You mean I'm going to take every single person? That guy did that to me, and you're going to prove to me that I did something? Are you kidding me? I mean, everything it was all wrong. That was my wrong. The nature of my wrong was my nature of my wrong thinking about where things started and where they were going.
Well, and the ultimate nature was thinking you were irresponsible for what you did while you were responsible for your irresponsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Responsibility. That's what freedom is, responsibility.
Now, if that's an absolute present state, both to Pierre's comments about trauma, if that's where the healing is in the present. And it doesn't take any time at all. You talked about the time it took before those consequences added up enough for you to pay attention. Pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth because we seem to be so ill at being proactive now, we don't even notice the consequences actually telling us immediately what's going on. We wait for it to get so bad before we finally say, I guess this thinking I'm doing about it, trying to dismiss it, trying to ignore it, trying to pretend I'm desensitized to it. Think of that. We think desensitization is our mastery of feeling better. What is desensitization? It's numbing. It's actually putting ourselves into a coma thinking, I'm better now. I don't feel anything. So we're feeling it all along while making believe we're not. And during that time, the pressure is building because the opposition doesn't really exist except in our thinking that there's something to oppose. But the effect of that step and thought does have an impact. Our bodies get charged with stress. Our muscles get tight. The inability of our body to function begins to be undermined. And it shows how potent our thinking can be, especially if it were used aligned with reality and truth, rather than making believe it is reality and truth, rather than making believe my life depends on fighting for my truth and reality, rather than see that if there's any fight involved at all, it has nothing at all to do with reality or truth and everything to do with what I'm thinking about my thinking, period. There's great healing in that. Why? Because the ever-present state of being isn't sick. And it, by the way, isn't unhealthy. And it isn't diseased. And it isn't insane. Insanity, like lies, are limited to the brains of humans.
Yeah.
And it isn't to say a dog beaten doesn't have tendencies of wanting to bite. Animals express this stuff. They're very sensitive to it. My fish know when I come to feed them that they're both going to eat, but I am a big shadow when I show up. And they kind of freak out for a second. Then they're like, oh, it's feeding time. They start coming back. Those sensations are accurate. If we actually had a threat, it's good to notice something's wrong. If the threat is what we're thinking and think that the wrong is right, we are creating an interminable inner conflict that causes doubt and insecurity and uncertainty on a chronic daily basis, living as though that's reality, which it isn't. Again, it's delusion, because insanity is obviously seeing things that don't exist, hearing things that don't exist. If we're talking to ourselves about things that are happening, we are delusional to imagine there's a self to talk to when all we're doing is thinking about our thinking. And to reduce it back to what it is allows it to happen in a way that it becomes useful, gainful, purposeful, just as the steps say. We become usefully whole. Why? Because we're not thinking on the premise of, I didn't do it. I have nothing to do with it. Think about that. I have nothing to do with it. I'm actually arguing for not existing. Why wouldn't that lead to suicide? Let me just prove that I didn't have anything to do with anything. You know, before my dad died, he was in the Marines and fought in one of the worst wars in Korea. And he said, all I want on my tombstone is not guilty. And he was buried at Rosecrans down in San Diego, and they wouldn't do it. So his second thing was another day in paradise. So from completely absconding to just conceding that it's all right. But the point is, we live this way and think defense of these things is even possible in the moment, in the present, and continue to build stress and make believe that somehow that stress one day will relieve when we get the thinking figured out. And it's the same thing we did with anything, the same thing we do with anything that we struggle with. Something that's become clear to me in the last month or so is that food is probably the best gauge on whether I'm acting compulsively or not. Because it's not something I'm asked to give up, like drugs and alcohol. I can say every day I haven't done it and I feel better because of the sobriety and the time I've had. But in fact, if the mentality behind the scenes is still functioning on the same basis that had me drink and use and think it was a solution, I'm probably doing it with other things. And food to me is the one thing that we all need, kind of like air and water. I mean, that would be another example. I didn't really breathe very well most of my life until I started to realize my posture was as depressed as my thinking. And that breathing deeply is actually a relaxant. It's actually it's both a stimulant and what do they call it? I don't know, something that
Exquisite.
puts the body, it just rests, the body rests as a result of deep breathing. It starts to put it at ease. Same with good water. We need water. We can go minutes without breathing, days without drinking water, and it takes weeks to die from not eating. And if what I'm eating largely is food that I like because it tastes good, I'm not getting the nourishment I need. So what's that food going to tell me? And what's my body going to say? Feed me more. So what am I going to do? Overeat things that are worse for me. It's exactly what an abnormal reaction to something is, exactly what an allergy is. The mental allergy is making believe that I can turn what's false into truth.
Metabolic.
Well, it undermines the metabolic, parasympathetic, nervous system, cardiac system. Every one of the bodily system is undermined by stress. So it's interesting. The one thing we want to disclaim we have anything to do with is completely undermined by the thing we're doing by disclaiming it. All of it. Our whole life is actually threatened by the thing we're doing in the name of saving it. That's insane.
Hey, Jack.
Hi.
Yeah. Hey, how's everybody doing? So I think Douglas touched on something and I didn't grab it, but and it might be here in plain sight. I'm a slow learner. What is the solution? We talk about what we're doing. What are the tricks to not? Now, I myself, a huge meditator, and it seems to really quiet things. But if I hang out with somebody, you were talking about, Jack, that's pretty toxic, I'm getting the impression that it's me that's toxic and not that person. Well, I got news for you, man. I have eliminated people in my life that are, not the greatest to hang around. And my life has gotten a lot better, by not hanging around them, because they're just a piece of work. And there's why I'm curious, two questions. What can we do to not be doing all this? And then why do we eliminate people when they're toxic?
Well,
anyway, throw it out there to everybody. I'm sure that there's some great conversation here.
Well, and I suspect by asking that you're interested in looking at it honestly and starting to actually come to terms with what may be happening for you rather than what you think is happening. That's a yes for those listening.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So,
yeah, I was muted. I don't, as you know, Jack, I don't talk a lot.
Well, that's why I'm so happy to hear you. So part of the issue is that keeping what we're doing to ourselves seems to maintain the problem because we really think there's a self to keep it to. Okay. So one of the solution here is to see that there's absolutely no problem other than what we're thinking about it. And if you start talking about it in terms that actually align with what's happening, you're going to see the whole thing dissolves anyhow, because the only reason it maintains itself is the ideas you have about it that you keep thinking more about will fix it. That's it. So there isn't anything there. It isn't really happening. It's all delusion to begin with. And the reason we stay away from toxic people is because we're unwilling to admit our own toxicity. So they're very, very inflammatory to us. They get near us and we want to get away because we're trying in our own thinking to get over it by eliminating them, and thinking getting rid of them gets rid of what we're doing. While it doesn't at all, it gives us another false impression that the excuse that being ignorant of it and avoiding it is the solution.
I don't know about that. I mean, listen,
I know.
Hanging around somebody that's just me, you know, that says, so you're saying that that's me, I'm me.
Well, it seems to mean a lot to you to get away from them.
I just, yeah.
So these are things to,
that's a good point.
You don't have to digest this immediately, but live with it and look at it. And this isn't to say, T, that we can't set limits. It isn't to say that at all, that we can't choose not to be with certain people. It isn't to say that at all. It's to say that when we're doing it on the basis of addictive thinking, we think it's a solution. We think it's really going to change things. And then we keep wondering, as you are today, why does it continue? Why is this still going on for me? What's the trick, you asked? There is no trick in this at all. The trick is making believe that it's true. The trick is thinking black magic is at play here. And the more I think about it, the more reality I'm going to bring to it, rather than see, the more I think about it, the more insanity I give it. And it isn't about not thinking. It's about starting to see what we're doing accurately enough to realize that Douglas said it earlier. He said, all of a sudden, the story became laughable. When at one point, his life depended on repeating it to people. His whole life was dependent on that all day long in the bar to make sure they heard it and understand it. And his only friends were the ones that agreed with it and patted him on the back because they wanted to support his insanity and their own too. They wanted somebody else in camaraderie.
So is this the same kind of the same deal? To go back a couple sentences, Eckhart Tolle says when you look at something, a defect or a thought, it can't stand to be looked at and it dissolves.
Well, if you're looking at it honestly, but if you're looking at it as an excuse and you're irresponsible for, you're going to continue to utilize that thing in this looping.
I'm talking about looking at it honestly.
Yes, I get it. But I want to remind you that there's two ways to look at it. And wherever the reason I point that out is that when you're still witnessing the obsessive thinking, you're clearly looking at something dishonestly that you think you're looking at honestly. And the whole thing of insanity is thinking we're not doing it. Right. That's the whole issue. So this doesn't mean, the beauty of this is that we're all doing that to any degree that we're doing that. You're not alone in it, as embarrassing as it seems, because we've kept so much to ourselves about what we think. And we think that because we've kept it to ourselves, people don't think those things of us, or they're thinking all sorts of things we wouldn't be happy to hear they're thinking. But we cleverly craft this sort of managed presentation and appearance and think people really see us that way, and they don't. They see us the way they think. And normally, if they're sick in any way, they're not seeing us as healthy. They're thinking of us as irritating in some way. Or
if you have a nice, happy thought, you feel happy. Why do you think, or is it interesting that instead of choosing to have, I'll have a happy thought, I start analyzing something like, what do I need to fix? Why didn't that happen? What's wrong? And in the opposite, if I just thought a happy thought, I'd be happy. I don't understand why I go to that other.
Because you're trying to, it's, having a drink had us feel happy, but it led to the next one, the next one, the next one, the next one. It never solved the problem. If you're catering to the idea that you need to feel better about something, you're not looking at the thing that's worse. You're thinking about how to get over it, how to get away from it, how to constantly, that's how we're used to thinking about things as solutions, T, that this idea that we're going to feel better about it is the goal. And yet if what's worse is overlooked, we're maintaining what's worse, and it's growing to that point that Douglas described, where he finally couldn't deny it any longer. Why do we need to wait? Because we become masters at deception and cunning and baffling ideas. That's really the cunning, baffling nature of this mental illness. And talking about it kind of puts the shoe on the other foot in a sense, because you begin to realize If I've been doing this and don't even think I'm doing it, that's pretty crazy. You got to start laughing a little bit to say, oh, wow, I haven't even been thinking I'm doing this. I've so cleverly devised these ideas I have, and I keep lockstep with them. And I think I'm by eliminating people, I'm proving I'm right, when in fact I'm getting further and further and further alone. And all of a sudden, more and more people qualify under that banner of I don't want anything to do with them. And pretty soon we're down to about 3 people or none.
The more that I feel a part of everything and everyone and every situation and every physical thing around me, the more that I can feel myself some commonality with it, the less I need any kind of a story. I don't have to come up with a reason why I'm different. What I'm looking at is my similarity with everything. If I just look around here at this building and these plants and all these things and realize what we all have in common, I begin to get satisfied and happy. I mean, I feel like I'm part of it all, and I feel like I fit. Like I'm the part that does this. I'm the experiential part of, from my perspective. But these bricks right now are experiencing something just as those plants are. They're breathing. They're interacting.
So you can see how quickly your own experience becomes affected by simple shifts of thought. And this isn't to suggest that we're talking about manipulating thought as a solution here, because I want to mention something else. Everything, everywhere is already what it is and doing what it's doing, regardless of whether we're thinking about it. So when I think it's my thinking I need to rely on to feel better, I'm once again in a loop of thought rather than realize there's nothing to think about any of that because it's all doing what it's doing.
Right.
Now I'm really free because I begin to realize the impact of my thinking and how it turns my feelings into this, that, and the other. I can start to notice that I'm creating this environment I'm seeing as my world or myself simply by positions I take that are either accurate or inaccurate. And when I take positions that are accurate, I start having a sense of, like the note I got that I mentioned this week from somebody who's been listening to the podcast. And he said, I never in my life thought that I wasn't who I thought I was. And he said, and I never thought things were any more than I thought of them. And he said, in the midst of that awareness, I started having these glimpses of this greater awareness, this glimpse of, now my sense is the glimpse is the ever-present nature of everything that we've always known, but we're still struggling to let go a little bit of fear is to have fear almost latch on immediately. As soon as we let go, it latches on because I've been so prone to using it as my guidance system. I haven't been prone to using peace and love as my guidance system. So most of my thinking is attached to what I think is true and real rather than what's actually true and real. So there's still a lot of lingering issues that come in, and circumstances, T, are a perfect way. Seeing those people like Pierre was talking about, starting to see people that really annoy me, start to give me a chance to, first of all, I begin to tell them what I'm thinking. This really bothers me. I don't like that. And what am I doing? I'm telling them about my thinking. I'm not telling them what's wrong with them. I'm telling them about what I'm thinking. It's a whole new conversation because all of a sudden I begin to actually take responsibility for what I'm doing and start to notice that I have these thoughts about them. Now, they may be doing exactly what I'm thinking, but the chances are they aren't doing it exactly as I'm thinking. And to any degree they aren't, I'm not thinking of them, but only my thinking of them. And my clarity is that they're also struggling. If they are toxic, they are struggling with the same thing I am struggling with and would like to see stop, but I'm not admitting my own willingness to constantly restart it in these ideas I have about trying to feel better and get away from it. I haven't come to terms with that. The reason we talk about this, T, over and over again, is to get better at starting to notice that we're doing it now. To any degree we're making believe it's some solution that needs to be created, there's some dishonesty about the problem that we're not admitting openly. And the immediacy of that is starting to say, nothing's ever happening that isn't happening where I am. And if everything is always happening where I am, everything is happening for everyone else and everything else where I'm happening too. Now, all of a sudden, I'm thinking inclusively, which is ultimately what the fifth step principle is: integration, integrity. Integrity is integration, and integration is inclusion. It's realizing that it's not talking to myself, another human being, and God. It's beginning to realize that that intimate connection is already what I'm part of. And I have a knowing awareness that I am subverting by my preoccupation of thinking. My thinking's start trying to solve a problem that my thinking is busy recreating over and over and over again. It shows how capable we are of mastering thought, that we can get to a point where suicide seems like an option, or drinking seems like an option, or overeating seems like an option, or eating poor quality food seems like an option, which are all suicidal tendencies, as solutions to overcome the discomfort, rather than begin to say, oh, I'm uncomfortable because I'm doing something that makes no sense, has no basis, isn't true, isn't real, and is simply a concoction of my own thinking. It is. That's causing me that grief, that mourning, that sense of loss, that sense of displacement. It isn't because I'm not where I am. It's because I think I shouldn't be where I am, because to admit where I am is where I am, as you were mentioning, Douglas, would be to admit that I know there is no story in the present at all. There's no narrative at all. Everything that's happening is the narrative of the present. None of it's telling a story. It's simply happening. So what are stories? Things that aren't happening, taking up my time in the present as though they're still happening. What's pain associated to those things? What's trauma? Reinforced over and over again, talking about the trauma of 20 years ago, rather than the traumatic experience I'm having right now, by divesting myself from the present nature of healing and the absolute nature of this absolute source that we have, and making believe it isn't here. I got to get somewhere else. There is nowhere else. There's never going to be anywhere else. There's never been anywhere else. It's always present. It's always now. We're always in the present. Now, if you contemplate some of those things while disbelieving them, you will see that your contemplation of them while disbelieving them will actually begin to unravel the disbelief, because you'll start to see they don't even need to be believed in to be had. But if you have any belief and any hope in them, and they're real and true, you'll start seeing that there's something there you never thought of, because you'll start thinking things you never thought to think naturally, which is intuition. It'll just start occurring to you in ways that are reaffirming. Herb Kagan says the ego looks for proof in advance of action, and spirit offers confirmation in the face of action immediately. I don't have to prove it, but the confirmation of that presence starts to occur to me in ways that it never, or may have in some way, but starts occurring in a never present way. And the ultimate admission is that's my natural state of being. And I wouldn't notice what's wrong if I didn't have that absolute state as a guidance system. None of the things I'm doing wrong would ever even occur to me, or even why would I come to a mental obsession meeting if everything I was doing that was wrong was right? It would make no sense. There'd be no discussion. And my experience is, it isn't just the few of us interested in talking about it, or the few of us listening to us talking, but wherever I seem to go, I find people who are struggling with this and don't even know they're struggling with or what they're struggling with, because they think it's life, they think it's normal, they think it's just the way things are. It's culture, it's the economy, it's all these other excuses, nothing to do with them. Interesting that we could be given such an enormous capacity and a highly developed sentient experience and do everything we could to pretend it's not even happening. It's crazy. So the talking about it, even in limited words, T, is a chance to begin to recognize that there's probably been things you've been nursing in your thinking that you've never bothered to mention. And as you do, it becomes a little more laughable, because you see that the thoughts once expressed, when I used to talk about things and still do, it gives me some perspective on them, because they don't seem as serious as when I'm mulling them over in my head. But when I write those things down, it gives them a place to live. And now I can put them in a drawer somewhere where I don't have to think about them as much, because I know the worry I had about forgetting them and trying to keep track of it all of a sudden there's a place for them to they can be in the dark somewhere in a drawer on a pad. So the writing helps, putting them down and starting to say, and I'm talking about the thoughts we have that seem completely absurd to admit to anybody. It becomes a little easier because as you see that everyone else is doing it too, to whatever degree they're doing it, and that we're all capable of it at any moment, because if we have free will, it means we are free to think things that aren't true or true. And if we're free to do that, we're creating a contemptful, repetitious idea that we're going to try to make truth and reality out of someday, somewhere, somehow. And it's never going to happen because it's always about then and never about now.
I don't think we really think it's true, though. I think we know that it's not true. We just are so familiar with the feeling that it brings up that we want it to be true. And now with my stories, there's so many less words and so much less to even write down, because the bar stool, Douglas, versus I don't even want to do my 4th step again with my sponsor right now, because I don't want to delve into a bunch of shit that's not real to me anymore. It's just
so the question is, are you getting irritated? Do you have impulsive behaviors? Do you have reactive behaviors? Do you have compulsive behaviors? If you are witnessing those are all effects of a cause, and the cause is thinking things that aren't true could be true. So I know that I thought when I started thinking this, that's it, I realize it, that's done. And then I began realizing that circumstances often presented me with opportunities that weren't very meditative or contemplated. They were highly reactive and highly charged, which was revealing to me that I was doing a lot of thinking about things I didn't even think I was thinking about. And that's where this really started to dissolve and started to actually, when I started admitting that, things I hadn't thought of started to occur to me that I had thought of 30 and 40 years ago. And all of a sudden I have relationship with them. Why? I'd been keeping them out of view as I thought I was in control. My proof was not looking at them, proved I can control things and maintain the irresponsibility. And all of a sudden I started feeling a little overwhelmed in my own experience. I didn't need to wait for circumstance. I just began to realize, wow, I've been doing this so religiously that I've really been insane for a long time, thinking I was better, thinking I was looking better, thinking I was feeling better. Because I was acting a little bit better, I thought I was better. And I was better, but I was just better than worse. I wasn't better in the sense that I'm over the cold. I was just not as bad as I was thinking that's better. And it certainly is better in that respect. So the other thing, Jana, that I realized, and I think is worth noting, that if I'm only thinking about my world, this world that I've been trying to be comfortable in the whole time, I've been trying to think that world lived and was real, rather than starting to say, wait a minute, if that isn't my world, the whole world is my world, and all the people in it are my people, and all the circumstances are mine. Now, all of a sudden, I start looking at my life and saying, wow, I don't seem to have much influence in this world at all. I've been operating on such a narrow basis for so long that I haven't even challenged myself to consider things that actually exist as actually existing and actually being a part of it as the responsible absolute nature of my being. Because I've been thinking all I needed was to be able to lock the door and read a book and feel better, have dinner with friends that I like and all that stuff. And all of a sudden, what am I? Abundant? No, I'm scarce. I'm acting in ways that are limited. I'm acting in ways that are self-serving. I'm acting same kind of thing in a brand new way, thinking I'm better. I am better to a degree. I'm probably not causing as much havoc, but to the degree that I'm causing it, I'm creating it, and I'm responsible for it all. And you know what's great about that? So too is everyone else. We all share this burden as we all share the freedom. If there's an intimate connection on an absolute level, then the connection we have on the disconnected level is the same. And that's, for me, good news, because I began to realize I got a lot of teachers that I run into every day. And if I'm willing to look and listen and at least speak to them in ways that are more honest, which I do my best to do, and I fail quite often, but if I do a little bit, the difference in the way people respond is enormously beneficial and wildly radiant. And it's like having someone you've always known in someone you've never even met. And that's a pretty abundant experience to have with people that may seem to be new in your life, when in fact, they've been around as long as they've been around, and we just hadn't crossed their path. And yet we've been crisscrossing it in some way, somewhere the whole time. So the bounty of this is starting to look at it all rather than some. And if we have an intimate source, which a lot of people ask why I spend so much time repeating that and why we keep going over the same thing, it's because the ideas we have is we think it's going to stop rather than see that it's always, the freedom we have makes it possible all the time. And the chances are, while we have a knowing sense that's peaceful, meaning we have a premise to make decisions from that isn't disturbing. And if I'm making a decision from a disturbing state, I'm going to create disturbing decisions and wonder why things keep going wrong. We have that knowing. If I'm not utilizing it and recognizing it and honestly seeing that it's happening all the time, because it's not even in time, it's always present, it's always my basis, then I'm still launching missiles thinking I've got, it's a new strike, a new method of something I'm going to get done and do. And rather than say, let me just look at the effects that will reveal the cause.
You repeating stuff is the beauty of Jack, though. I mean,
what's that?
You repeating things, and like you said, people always say, why do you keep saying that? That's the beauty of your teaching. I couldn't have accepted all of the gifts that I've gotten from you if you weren't so steady. You haven't faltered. You don't get bullied. Your principles are, you have to repeat them, but that's because that's the nature of our human existence, is that we don't hear something one time and stay steady with that thought. We're always veering off and wandering off and going back to the familiar. And I wouldn't be the human being that I am today if you hadn't have repeated the stuff. You never veer off. That's the whole beauty of your teachings. That's amazing that you're so steady and principled.
Let me keep from veering now. And in the name of that vein, remind you that if everyone didn't know what they know, as I know what I know, there would be nothing to hear. So it isn't what I'm saying, it's what you know and your own willingness to begin to hear it. That's the transition here. It isn't what I say. I'm not going to say it in a way that you'll listen to it if you don't want to hear it. You have that right. You absolutely have the right to your own inner choices. That's the one thing that we seem to have the switch on, the yay or nay, the yes or no. And if it weren't for your knowing, you'd never see any of this. It wouldn't be available for you to even grasp, because it would be completely absurd and impossible and improbable and preposterous. And the awareness.
I agree that my acceptance of the things, the principled things that you say, like I just always go back to that one thing when we were first all joining, and Alice said that she meditated like 90 minutes a day, and you're like, poof, you don't need to do that. Life's a meditation, and I remember thinking that was insulting, 2.5 years ago or whatever, that the things that you said were sometimes harsh or insulting, and it wasn't true. They're just principled thoughts that you're sharing, and they're not necessarily even yours. They're just ideas that make a working life or make things.
Well, and part of it, I'll loop back to T too, because the opinion that we can do something to feel better and then leave that thing that we do and find things annoying and frustrating is that we're practicing during a time where things are quiet and peaceful, and then wondering why we're disturbed when we start interacting with things that aren't quiet or peaceful.
No, it's disturbing.
If we're absolutely, because what happened to my meditate? What I need to do now is meditate 24 hours a day. Well, let me just suggest we're already in a meditative state 24 hours a day. That awareness that we have is always present. I'm not suggesting not doing anything that you like doing that gives you an impression that's better. Anything, do it all. I'm not here to limit or stop or any of that.
Just not compulsively.
The point is, if we're in a contemplative, what I realized is that it was easy to sit next to a babbling brook and have an hour of peace and calm. But why was it that when I got into my car, everybody became a fucking idiot and didn't know how to drive?
It happened to me yesterday. I had to go to the post office. And by the time I came home, I was completely out of my mind because it's on a highway and everyone was going 15 miles an hour, which now I'm telling you that because I feel justified in my insanity. Because wouldn't that piss you off if everyone, now I want all of you guys to be my co-conspirator in the fact that the guy was going 15 and, or everyone was going 15. And I want to explain to them, not everyone's on vacation.
And I'm thinking she's in Hana, disturbed.
I know, exactly.
One of the most, I think John Lindbergh was buried there because he called it the most beautiful place on earth.
It is. It's insane. But I had to go outside the gate because my girlfriend's little vegan food truck, she needed some cups from the post office. And I go, yeah, I can do that for you. And it's like, 13 miles away. And I made it there. Okay. But the way back was just, and that was me 100%. And I was shocked at my own.
I got that.
I was completely shocked at my own discomfort, and I passed like probably 5 cars.
So let's use that for a second.
Yeah.
If it's there and we're awake 24 hours a day in some way, even when we're sleeping, we're conscious of something. Our dreams, think of our dream state as being like our awakened state. Dreams feel very real when we have them, right?
Mm-hmm.
We wake up with these experiences we want to tell people about because they seem so real. It's the same thing during the day. We're making believe all that's happening is what we're thinking, and we're thinking we're awake. And if we're contemplative and meditatively aware and only thinking of things as we're thinking of them, we're basically asking our thinking to do for us what it cannot do because what's already been done for us is being ignored. That present state is here. Now, I'm not saying we should never be annoyed and we should never be irritated and we should never be anything. I'm not saying that at all. When we are, it's a good indication that we are coming up against a thought that's not true. That's it. It doesn't mean we're going to fall in love with traffic. It doesn't mean we're going to like flavors we don't like. None of that comes with this. It's just a chance to begin to observe contemplatively what's happening as it's happening. And as we witness what's happening as it's happening, it does not seem incumbent on any of us to continue it because the narrative that disappears doesn't create a story about what's happening. All we become is witnesses to everything that's happening. Very different experience and very fulfilling, as a matter of fact. And pleasing because we're not displeased with the conflicts that we're creating or uncomfortable with the discomfort we're creating or dysfunctional with the dysfunctional problems we're creating. It starts to.
How do you work that into, like, I don't feel like I'm getting my fair share. I feel like I should be getting more of something. I should have done more. I'm not blaming anyone else, but I should have more.
You have asked this as long as we've been meeting, as long as you
How do I get over that?
As long as you maintain.
Done more to get more, though. That's what you're saying, right? You should have done more. Like, you should have gone backstage at that concert.
Yeah.
At the cool guy, but it would only have fulfilled.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm not even talking about possessions. I'm talking about just more. I should be the king. I should be this. I should just more of everything.
Only for self-satisfaction, not for everybody cumulatively, right? You're not thinking beyond you.
Right.
Yeah.
You think who you are is what you think, Anthony, and that's it. It's that simple. It's automatic. It's going to happen as long as you maintain that thought. You want it to happen or you wouldn't be doing it.
Don't you feel that way during the day? Like if you see the king or you see something,
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I feel. And you're talking about your experience.
I'm just thinking, is that normal? Like, don't you feel that way? Like that should be mine.
No, I don't tend to feel that. And last person on the planet I'd want to be is a king. It wouldn't even be the last. that would be hopeful, but no, it's just, Anthony, if you're not fulfilled in your awareness, you're going to think something needs to be done about it. And if you're fulfilled thinking you're not, again, it's your thinking that you're struggling with, not reality and truth. And you're going to come up with all sorts of deceptive ways to make believe that it's fun to talk about constantly and reinforce, but all you're doing is reinforcing the ideas that have no basis other than in your thinking. And you're good at it. You're very good at it, as I've been very good at it. And still am to any degree that I maintain those kind of thoughts.
Anthony's not good at getting co-conspirators, though.
That may be why he's a little more manic.
No one's
Takes,
doing.
takes a lot of insistence and repetition to make this point.
We
But it's a
love
choice. Listen, it's a choice.
it.
We decide what we're going to do. We decide what we choose to think. We
Well,
decide
the
what
good
we
news
choose-
is it doesn't happen very long now. Now I could look, I actually wouldn't want to be the, I can think it for a second. I'm like, it's a terrible job. He's got a job. And so it doesn't last. I still, now the good news is I have it. I realize what it is and I talk about it. I'm not hiding it. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, I still have those thoughts, but they don't last that long,
It's
So-
you're asking about them as though you don't know how they're created. That I
Well, because I
maybe-
just want to make sure there wasn't some answer where somebody says, "Oh, you just concentrate on this number or this thing or just
But
say
you can do,
this."
Anthony, you can distract yourself and continue to do those things too. We are perfectly capable of making believe that a solution is solving it when in fact it's denying it. And we wonder why it's getting worse. And I would suggest that's exactly why this keeps coming up for you.
I'm already the king of the kingdom of my thoughts. If I
Yeah.
want to take a
I like
position,
Think of the word kingdom
kingdom.
when we're when we're thinking things that aren't true are true.
And that's what's good. See, that's what I love because I don't, you know what I mean? I hate getting beaten up because I'm still having those same thoughts. And it's like, it makes it funny. Now, I'm glad I brought it up because you're only as sick as your thoughts, I guess,
Anthony, you've come a long way in being able to look at it.
Yes.
As you begin to see that it's not what I say, it's not what anyone here says, it's not this discussion, but actually your own awareness, and just sit with it, you'll start to see, as you already have, because I've known you long enough and we've talked about this, you'll start to see more publicly that you actually, in your own contemplative awareness, will watch things dissolve immediately because you'll stop acting on them as though everyone that comes along has to be dealt with, as though there's something to act on. It's just an impulse. If it's an impulse, it's driven by discomfort. It's driven by doubt. It's driven by the insanity of making believe that somehow you're going to turn it into something that is.
or fear of scarcity. I liked where you started that. You know what I mean? If you're looking
But
at
why
this
wouldn't
little
it be
world, my
scarce?
world,
You have no basis in your thought. What could be more
Right.
basis than something that doesn't exist, purporting to be everything you are? Think of that. Talk about self-centered fear. Why wouldn't we be scared to death when we're not even paying attention to what's happening? This is like being in the fast lane on the freeway and wearing a blindfold and saying, what could go wrong? Doing 90 miles an hour. You know it's coming. It doesn't have to happen to know it's coming. And that doom that we sense is accurate because when we're not at the wheel, we know something's going to go wrong that we are asking for and pretending we have nothing to do with when it happens. Think of how we think of experiences. I didn't mean it, we say. Oh no, we meant it. We just hate the idea that we were actually going to be responsible for it. When we're responsible, it wouldn't happen. Intention is actually what's happening. You ever wonder what your intention is? Look around. You'll see you're exactly where you are with everything that's happening exactly as it's happening. And that never changes.
and I guess some of that is good. I mean, it is good to want more. When you feel like you don't want more, what is there left? It's always good to have goals and that kind of stuff. So it's
Well,
just a fine line there.
The impulse, Anthony, when you're full of your own, when the confirmation of your own experience becomes confirmed simply by doing what you can with what you have and start to function on that basis, you'll see that a lot of those impulses to think you need more will go away. And the more you'll want doesn't have anything to do with the things you thought would satisfy you. It just changes. And yes, you can decide to do more. Like with tea, you can draw lines, you can make limits. You're welcome to do it. When you think they're real and true, you think you have to maintain them forever rather than say, that was a convenience of the moment. I made a decision. That's all. We make a decision in the third step to turn our will and our life over to care, as though it wasn't true to begin with. We needed to decide it. What it shows us is that when we start making decisions in favor of something real, all of a sudden we align with an awareness that has always been there. We were just delusionally imagining that our decision not to was really going to carry the day. Think about ambition and confidence and all these things people talk about having to have. There is no confidence in having everything there is. It's just a state of being. It's a state of awareness. It's an absolute state of ever-present knowing now.
So, it's, this meditation thing, it'd be interesting to see where I would be if I didn't meditate, because I go through the day and man, I'm pretty damn mellow, man. I mean,
Pretty what?
pretty damn mellow. I mean, the
During the
mind.
day.
Oh man, and the mind's not
Do you think he said gullible?
mellow.
Okay.
Ty,
So
when you're meditating, you're aware of what you're aware of, right?
yeah,
You're not telling stories and trying to figure out how you can think more about everything that's going on. You're actually just sitting with what's happening.
Yep.
Okay. That's your present state all day long. The only difference is, see, you now know that present state from meditating. Now, again, I'm not asking people not to meditate. I'm not suggesting we don't. I'm just saying that if we're contemplatively aware 24 hours a day, why not start to actually utilize the experience we're having to uncover the things we think are covered and disclose the things we think we haven't disclosed, and to begin to actually eliminate by illuminating the things we think are dark in us or may be struggling with. And if you're aware in meditation, which meditation, in my experience, gives us an experience that we are aware in a way that doesn't include thinking. We don't have to think about being aware to know that we're aware. There's a clarity in there that happens when we stop for a minute the thinking. So if that clarity doesn't change, the only thing that changes when we walk out of that hour and a half or that hour or 20 minutes is what's happening and what we're thinking about what's happening. And if the thinking I'm having is engulfing me in the flames of making believe the thinking I'm doing about what I'm thinking is true and real, rather than just something I'm thinking about, that present awareness seems to disappear. And or I can continue to utilize it, but I'm also finding myself trying to eliminate the problems by getting rid of them, rather than saying, what if these are all uniquely designed like a textbook for a class you take in college? You tend not to show up thinking you know everything about the class, or you wouldn't be taking it. And the textbook would be perfectly written, typically, even though they rewrite them every year so they can resell them. So they must say what they're saying in a different way. But it's perfectly written to disclose the information about that topic. And if life is what we're experiencing, maybe all those things happening that are annoying are actually revealing what you're annoyed with in your thinking from the repetitious.
Well, thing, your character defect is always, as Bill says, Bill C, your character defects always searches you out, and you're confronted.
Think about that. Think about the character as though it has an ability to search you out, rather than you utilizing them to make believe you're the character that's the defective.
Yeah.
But I mean, when to look at it in little bits is to maintain the majority of it, and to look at it totally can seem absurd. But by looking at it generally enough to be inclusive of everything going on, it starts to make sense of the fact that we might suffer from the ideas of the separation and individuation we create, rather than say, oh, this is just a natural byproduct of thinking things that aren't true as true. All the consequences we face, all the sort of lack of scarcity, and the preponderance of scarcity in the sense that we're scared, we're afraid, we think we're not going to have enough, we think there isn't enough. I face those things on a daily basis in some degree, especially now with interest rates going up and all that. I've been in real estate a long time. This isn't something I've come up against before. It's new. There's certain challenges that are happening. I don't always deal with those immediately and happily and say, oh, everything's going to work out fine. What I realize is that I have the potential of being more honest and for confronting things sooner than later, rather than delusionally make believe that somehow it'll get better by waiting around and hoping it does. I can take steps that are a lot more confrontive and a lot more preemptive than I normally would have taken when I would wait for them to get so bad because I thought I was living in this bubble where I had nothing to do with it.
Well, that's a smart business. I mean, for gosh sakes. That's
Yeah, but it's hard to get to. Believe me, I know exactly what you're talking about. I would just put stuff off because I would say, oh, everything's going to be okay. But now in the illumination, I can do things preemptively that I couldn't do. I couldn't do it before. I just couldn't. I had too much of an unquiet mind.
Well, and part of the issue too is we happen to live in a very affluent society.
What?
and so as long as we have a lot more than we need, a lot of the pressing problems that somebody who's working on a day just to meet their needs don't seem to exist for us, and yet they exist. And part of that view is that it's okay for me because I've got this big life, and not notice that it's not okay for everybody else within that range, or all of them. And that maybe there's more I could do in ways that would be better. Maybe if the mentality got better amongst all of us, everyone would be more productive naturally to avoid the issues that we're seeing socially that seem so impossible to deal with. Maybe if looking at this as something holistic and integrated is to start to actually confront life. And my sense is we're not afraid of death. We're actually afraid of facing life in its entirety, which would mean all of it, not some of it. And start to actually, if we can do it here quietly amongst ourselves, seemingly, even though we may be listening, people are listening. If we can talk about it and think about it in those terms here, it will become much more palatable to be doing it out there rather than think of those things as impossible. And you said earlier, Jana, which I will challenge you on, that's just human nature and that's what we do and we go with the familiar. You repeat that story, you live up to those expectations as long as that story exists. All that is, human nature is not insanity, by the way. Just to make a note.
Character defect is to go back to what's familiar, and the angst of putting things off and not being responsible has been familiar to me. It's dissolving. It's getting better. I used to completely freak out when tax time came. Like everyone would have to leave the house, and it was the only way I could navigate it. And I don't do that anymore. And it's such a gift, and I'm so grateful. But I do think about what was, because for so many years, that's just how I navigated stuff. I had to have a certain amount of angst to move forward with it.
Well, you didn't have to, you chose to. You thought you needed it because that's what your storytelling led you to.
Correct.
And so I only challenge the story, and we use those stories, and I say them multiple times during the day and catch myself and say, oh, well, that's just a story I'm telling about. Like I have a friend who's wildly successful in dealing in the 12 steps with thousands of people. And he thinks that that it's just human nature that we do these things. Wrong. It's just human nature. And I would say, how could it be natural to be insane? Because I'm not looking at this as some sort of byproduct of some cutesy little thing we do that's just some fluffy little bear. I'm looking at it and saying, we've been doing this collectively so long that we actually live in a world where people don't eat, and we think it's okay. And they don't have clean water, and they don't have sewer systems, and they're drinking out of water that's been filled with sewage. And we think that's okay. That's okay because I don't see it and I'm not near it. It's okay. And I know it's going on, but it's not, I'm not smelling it and I'm not witnessing it and I have nothing to do with it. That is not true. That is not accurate. That is not an assessment that would ever lead to thinking of anything other than continuing to perpetuate it and think it's not happening. So globally isn't too hard to think about. Why not think about everybody if we're blaming people on a pretty regular basis and thinking that humanity's nature is wrong and just doing these things? We're already thinking globally. Why not think about globally as a nature that's actually healthy and healing and based on an absolute state of being that is absolutely unflappable and isn't discontented because it's actually the content and essence of everything. It isn't some negotiable thing that comes and goes when we think it's here or gone. It's just an absolute present state of being. And now see, that's good for everything and everyone, every molecule, every one of the things that physicists don't even know exist yet, that haven't even named yet, that are happening right now to allow everything that's happening to have us even talking about it would be included in that. And if I can conceive of that, that's a contemplative meditation in the midst of everything that's happening, rather than a quiet meditation trying to be excluded from everything that's happening and give myself an impression that that peace is only there when I take time out, rather than start to see that the peace is actually giving me clarity of my doubt and of my discontent and of my irritation and my impulses and reactiveness and compulsive behaviors. I wouldn't notice them.
I think that it brings up separateness too.
Well, it gives you the idea that we are separate, which is obviously a pretty scary idea when you're intimately connected to everything and make believe you're not. That would be the cause of a science fiction horror film. And even in horror films, we go to a horror film knowing they're horror films and we jump. when the guy comes out from behind the closet that looks like he does with the knife. We're there knowing it's a horror film. And we still jump. Our impulses are triggered easily because we are sentient beings. We are sensitive to our sensations. And to pretend we're not, and that that's the goal, is to desensitize ourselves. And being numb is basically a sleepwalking effort. And the whole point of the steps is to be awakened spiritually and realize we've always been, like Jack Kerouac said, the enlightened man realizes he's always been enlightened. And I'm sure he meant women because he liked them a lot. So if that's the case, it's now. We're already there. There's no place to go. There's no place to get. Anthony, to the degree you think that isn't true, you think you need more, want more, have to get more, all that stuff. That's what triggers.
Well, I like what you said though today. Actually made a lot of sense. I never heard you say that before. That if you're looking just at your stuff, yeah, it seems small. Your scarcity, it's your little stuff. But if you look at everything as the possibility, all of a sudden it doesn't seem quite so scarce. I don't know why.
Well, because you're recognizing that you're actually a part of all that stuff. But you know what's interesting too, Anthony? You know how many times we probably talked about this?
I was going to say, he said, you've never said this before. I'm like, your awareness just opened up, Anthony. He said it almost every meeting we've ever had for 3 years.
And actually, awesome. After I said that, after I paused, I realized I don't even believe it.
That was beautiful. That was a total awareness moment. That's so good.
To Ty's point and idea, we often don't even hear what's being said if we are entertaining obsessive thoughts. All we hear is what we think is being said. Why? Because we don't want that thought rocked. We don't want that thought is already rocked. It's already causing us so much emotional turmoil that if I do anything to engage it any further, I know it's going to get worse. But what's interesting is a lie always thinks that telling the truth is its greatest threat. It's always the opposite. When it comes to sick thinking, the one thing we're doing, the thing that tells us we're going to die if we actually admit it, is the thing telling us that we're dying, keeping it to ourselves, rather than seeing the freedom comes from saying, I have had this thought and I have never bothered to mention it, and start to notice our own reactivity to things that are going on isn't what's happening. It's what we're thinking about it. And when I'm obsessive, I'm going to think what's being said is only what I think, not what's being said at all. So, you know, when you have people say, you don't even listen to me, they are right. In addition to the fact that they may not be saying anything worth listening to, which is another potential. If you're thinking about what they're thinking, if you're thinking what they're saying is all you're thinking about, you're not listening at all. And that breakthrough isn't something, I can't make that decision for anyone. And you can't make that decision for anyone.
Or even ourselves.
What's that?
We can't make that decision even for ourselves. I mean,
I would say we're making the decision for the self we think we are, which sets off the idea that we can't not make that decision, which is what addictive thinking is. We think it's happening to us and we have no other choice. The fact is, if we're struggling with the effects, we are causing the effects. Start to get used to that thought. If I'm struggling with the effects, I am causing the effects. That sort of dispels the rumor that there's no possibility we have anything to do with it, but we have to continue. Ty, to your question, how do I stop? The stopping is being able to start looking at the fact that we keep starting it. It isn't about stopping it. If all we did was try to stop the drinking and not come to terms with the fact that we had no power over drinking, we would keep drinking to prove we could control our drinking. It's the same thing with the thinking. If I think I need to stop it all the time, I'm trying to stop the effect, but I'm not acknowledging the cause of that effect. And if my thought is the origination of that effect, and I think it's reality, I'm causing an effect I don't think I can stop, because why would I be able to stop reality? And yet I'm facing reality, making believe it isn't even true. By making believe my thoughts are true and real, I'm also claiming simultaneously that reality and truth are not true and real. So think of the dichotomy there. I'm trying to disqualify the thought I'm having by thinking I'm not the cause of it, while in fact I'm trying to disclaim reality and truth as being my cause. Thoughts come from as a result of that essence, that infinite absolute nature. We are products of that. We are life forms.
And I can see why this is good to think about your thought, like for 1 to 3 hours a week to think about like to get your thoughts kind of in alignment in a way, to tune it. It's like a tune-up, like you're running a sports car and every week it needs to go in for a tune-up because it just doesn't run right for very long.
Anthony and Dole, to that point, we meet 2 or 3 hours a week. There's 165, 166 other hours a week. And since we each make this decision, and since we each already know these things, the question is it worth beginning to talk about this more openly with people, even in the slightest way, even if we think we're not good at it, which I'm not particularly good at. I think I'm better than I've been, but I think I also have some things to learn in terms of presenting this and talking about it in an orderly fashion. But in a group discussion, what I know is things go where they go. What's said is said. People respond as they do or they react as they do. And think of responsibility as the ability to respond. Reactiveness is an automatic defense. It's a robotic defense of something that we're trying to protect. And looking at these effects as the cause starts to isolate the cause as being what we're doing, even when we don't think we are. It starts to become a little more obvious. And living with that is sort of demoralizing for a minute, because I thought my whole life depended on lying and cheating and stealing and bullshitting and promoting all these other ideas and getting over them and getting them over on others and thinking when other people believed in them, look at the audience I have. I have 8 people in the entire world out of 8 billion that align with me. I'm the winning character in this argument. It's crazy. Well, I got 7.9999 against billion. So our discussion, which my sense is has evolved in the last couple of months in sort of exponential ways. And one of the things that is pretty common in the discussion about alcoholism and drug addiction and other things is the progressive nature of those diseases, meaning if you stop drinking for 10 years and start again, you will start almost, if not identically, at the same point you would have been if you'd never stopped.
Or worse.
But here in this discussion, the progressive nature is that if we've spent 50 years harboring thoughts that aren't true, we can get better in a nanosecond, because it's the willingness of starting to see that it's all been a mirage, it's all been a veil, it's all been a transparency thought to be a block, thought to be obstructive, thought to be real. And all of a sudden, you start having an awareness, just like the email I got this week from that listener who said that he found himself surprisingly aware of things that seemed to be glimpses. My sense is that those moments of clarity are these glimpses of what we're always aware of, but desperately attempting to make believe is something we can control, because we're used to controlling this defective thinking and being in control. And let me assure everyone listening, there is no control in insanity. The whole point, trying to control insanity is to really be insane. Trying to control drinking when you can't drink is to drink insanely. Same with drugs or alcohol or any compulsion that you have. If you're trying to stop it and not see why you're starting it, you're going to fight forever to do that, because you're ignoring the effect of the present state of your mental demise and your mental conflict and the weight of this depression that you're trying to escape, and not admitting it's coming from that. And when you do, the compulsions evaporate, the conflicts evaporate, the reactiveness and impulsiveness evaporates. It just starts to dissipate. Think of disillusion. It's a literal dissolving. Dissolving something is a literal dissolving. It's a disillusion of the illusion. It's starting to see that reality and truth, while we can't see them, we know them. And how we know them is in a spiritual basis. And that's just a word for whatever that thing is that we know. Doesn't make it spiritual. It doesn't make it God. It doesn't make it any of the words we use. It simply is what it is. And we know what it is because we're based on it. We can't possibly, it's like a fish trying to think they need to understand water before they can swim. We seem to be the only creature that think we need to figure out something infinite before we can share it and express it.
I think we loophole and cherry pick. Like we get a certain amount of awareness, but there's always going to be like some little thing stuck in it's in our awareness. Like I know what I'm aware of that my thing is, and I just haven't dissolved it yet.
Well, listen, it may never dissolve in the sense that it's always available. What freedom, it's interesting, if we weren't capable of lying and pretending it's true and real and creating insanity, we would be condemned to a limited potential. That wouldn't be a loving spirit.
No.
A loving spirit says, you get to do whatever you want. And if you want to be insane, you get to do that too. And if you want to kill yourself, you're welcome to do that. We're free to do that. The question is that the best thing we can do with what we have? And isn't it interesting that as a species, we have begun to think that this is human nature, and we talk about it that way, when to talk about human nature as being insanity is not natural at all. It's not healthy at all. It's not functional at all. And yet, it seems to be a fairly common thought that it's just human nature. It's just life. No, it's not.
Like it's outside of us.
Yeah. Like it's doing to us what we cannot stop having happen when we're the creators of it, the inventors of it. And because our platform is the same in an absolute sense, so too is our human experience, almost identical in terms of potential. And we choose to do it in ways we call our own so we can distinguish ourselves rather than see that platform. That what I'm doing wrong when I make believe a thought is true and real is exactly the same thing other people do. The byproducts may be different to give ourselves the idea that we're really exceptional in the messes we make. And they're unique to us, so we can tell stories about them because we think other people aren't going to understand them. And we're right to think that because there's no way to understand anything that's insane.
Or we want them to understand it. That's why there are co-conspirators. Then we can join in the insanity.
The problem is if it's insanity, they're only hearing what you think they're saying, and you only have them think you only think they're hearing what you're saying, and they're only hearing what they're thinking. And what you're conspiring on is something you don't even notice is happening. Well, in fact, because it's the insanity, the invisibility of the insanity that's going on that brews on us in a cauldron that has us largely, people who drink a lot tend to hang out with people that drink a lot. People who do meth tend to hang out with people who do meth. There tends to be a camaraderie in that familiarity that is sick enough to give us the impression we're better off when, in fact, again, we're killing ourselves. The same way that doing something to feel good about something that's wrong kills us. It undermines our potential, undermines our capacity. To get better at doing that eventually adds more and more stress to all of our bodily systems, which are indicating that we're actually ignoring what's actually happening. In the name of thinking, we're feeling better.
So I've had a lot of dialogue with the human being that talks about the absolute and seems to have a pretty satisfactory life. Anyway, talks about what we talk about a lot and often is like 5 steps ahead of me. And I just found out that they are totally not even remotely sober. And I was so judgmental about it, so freaked out about it. And then I thought, well, in the overall scheme of things, nobody owes me. They don't owe me their sobriety, and it's not their gig. And I can still have dialogue with them on. It's pretty aware dialogue and pretty expressive and pretty principled. But I was just so taken aback and shocked by that knowledge. And judgmental about it.
Well, those are all good things just to notice. And if they're reactive and you feel condemned or contempt, they're sort of signals and signs alerting you to what's happening that you may not otherwise think is happening. So noticing, like Anthony, to your point, if you just notice the environment around you as it's happening and start to see the thinking you do in relation to it, it will reveal itself as to being productive and gainful and purposeful, or contemptful and spiteful and hateful. You'll see that it'll kind of grow in one direction or the other. We're capable of it because it's a possibility. And if we're given all possibility, It doesn't mean we can ever make anything of it other than the experience we create, because there's nothing useful that will ever come out of an insane thought, because the whole point of insanity is that they have no basis in reality. And if there's any productivity that's caused and created, it's always aligned with nature. So the causes and creations of insanity tend to be destruction, violence, unthinkable actions, trying to prove somebody's in charge, somebody's in control. Suicide is the last desperate act of proof that you're in control of the insanity you're maintaining. So too are all these guys going out and shooting these people. They're trying to prove they got it. What I need to do is kill as many people at a mall today to prove I'm in control. Most of them, if they survive, begin to realize pretty quickly that that wasn't the best thing they could have done that day. The better we get, the better everyone gets. If you're on a boat and the tide rises, you rise with the tide. If you're in a lock somewhere and the lock rises, you rise with unless the boat's sinking.
I believe that. I believe the inclusivity is cumulative, and
Yes. Immediate.
I feel that. I mean, I really feel that. I don't feel like it's them and me, or that there's any separateness, or that I could judge a singular person. I don't even believe anybody's wrong, because it would be so strange for me to crawl inside somebody's head and think that I could judge them for their thoughts. There is no there. We're all here. We're all in this together. And the better and the cleaner and the more loving thoughts and actions that happen, even with starting with me, with one human being, it's all cumulative. There wouldn't be war if everybody had that little spark, the little, holy moment of the fact that we're all connected and
everybody's already got it. They're just not acting on it. So right. I don't need to be more loving to know that love would be the nature of an absolute source. What would be lacking in that nature if it's absolute? Nothing. What would be withheld? Nothing.
Right.
If there's nothing lacking, there's nothing withheld. It's an absolute state of being that cannot be interfered with. Beginning to contemplate that really allows thought to get off the hook of making believe it's thought that's going to get us there. And you start to find that relief that comes with it. That relaxant. It's like a muscle relaxant. That was the breathing earlier. A relaxant, like they give you muscle relaxants to relax spastic thought or muscles when they get into spasms. Breathing does that naturally. Just calms our body down. It lowers. If you take 2 or 3 good breaths through your nose and out your mouth before a blood pressure test, your blood pressure will generally drop 10 or 20 points pretty quickly. If you're really taking deep breaths, sitting up, allowing your lungs to function. We have a design of health. To treat ourselves in ways that are unhealthy ends up inflicting us with things like bad posture, bad eating habits, bad all sorts of habits that are basically killing us. And we're going to die anyway. The question is, why are we rushing the gate? Why do we say we're afraid of death and rushing to get there? It's interesting.
Why do we think of poor food as a reward? Like, I know so many people that because they can't drink anymore, they want to eat a pint of ice cream every day, and somehow it's justified and it brings some sort of joy, but there's got to be an inherent knowing, and it's like a punishment to eat well, and it isn't. It's a gift to be able to eat well, and I don't know. It just seems like,
in line with the sick thinking, sick actions are going to come because thinking is a primary action. If we're thinking sick thoughts, we're going to act in sick ways, period. And the interesting thing about the allergy is it's not limited to alcohol. Alcohol is a sugar-based substance.
Oh.
It happens in marijuana. It happens with cigars. It happens with cigarettes. It happens with heroin. It happens with meth. It happens. Anything that can alter our experience has the potential to be abused. And food is certainly one of those things.
Yeah.
So if we're thinking sick thoughts, we're going to treat those sick thoughts, forgetting that we have one of the most complex, capable chemical factories in our own body that could be producing, if we weren't living in the face of stress, well-being drugs that would give us a greater sense of well-being automatically, and we wouldn't be depleted of all these things we think we need to have people subsidize for us, because the stress wouldn't be taking, if we're operating in a state of mental obsession or mental stress, it's going on 24 hours a day. Most of the drugs that are depleted in our system are depleted because they're emergency drugs. They're things that are in store for that time we need, for the time the bear shows up on our front porch. What are we going to do then? And we depress our own bodies by making believe these emergencies that we're creating, these anxieties we're creating, these stresses we're creating are real and true, and end up thinking they're happening to us while we maintain them as they're happening as a result of what we're doing, happening by us.
What do you mean by people subsidize us?
Not people, but our chemical factory. Drugs.
Okay.
We're given drugs to try to make up for the depletion of these things without looking at the thinking is doing the thing to the body that's depleting it. We know we're depressed. We know we're demoralized. That would be a pretty good evidence that our body is struggling. We're imposing a weight on it that isn't natural. And yet it's acting as though it's a real threat, because it is a real threat to the body, because it only knows to do what it can to help. But when we're feeding it sick thoughts, it's doing the thing that's actually killing us. What does it become? Reversed. What's an allergy? An abnormal reaction to something. When we lie, when we think ego is truth, we have an abnormal reaction. What is that? To do the thing that kills us in the name of saving us. It's a conflict.
Some of the meetings I go to I feel that are almost dangerous, because people talk a lot about stress and then they give you a story that backs it up with justifications, and then the co-conspirators jump in, and at the end of the meeting you see like 5 people patting them on the back going, yeah, that's tough, about something that happened fucking 35 years ago. And I want to say, oh my God, you should be in our meeting, because it's...
Oh, but your experience allows you to speak and say what I've learned.
I do, and I'm not well liked. I say because I'm responsible. I went to 3, I think I told you, I went to 3 meetings in a row where this girl had a story that her frontal lobe was actually bigger than everybody else's because her dad abandoned her as a child. And 3 meetings in 24 hours, we have to be in the same meeting. And every single one, I said, well, I take 100% responsibility, and that gave me freedom. Nobody can do anything to me. And she got the pats on the back, and everyone was like, fuck you, go back to the North Shore. So, I mean, Listen,
reactivity will be common when you begin speaking honestly, but you don't need to aim your points at anyone to make those points.
I didn't, and I don't.
I didn't hear that. I was speaking beyond that. Just in the tendency is not to do it because of the reactivity of others, because we become so accustomed to trying to people please and appease people that honesty becomes like the last thing we tend to do or often have done. And to speak honestly is actually to give people a chance to see something. It may take them 3 weeks or a month or 6 weeks to say, oh, that's what you were saying. I didn't get that at first. But they tend to come around. It's kind of like that story about Bill trying to carry the message for 6 months and nobody ever took the message. Most of those people he talked to got sober and stayed sober, which we don't always talk about. But what he learned was it was about what he did, not about what everybody else did, that was central to the message. So it's about what we do when we go out in our day rather than what everybody else does. That's central to the authenticity and the genuine nature of our ability to express ourselves honestly, not as an attack to anybody, but just saying, you know, I've had a lot of those same thoughts and I struggled for as long as I had them. And speak in terms that are self-owned in terms of, I don't think there's a self to own them, but at least possessed by us in a way that, you leaving, Douglas?
No, go ahead.
So that to me is the growth, because if someone hears something healthy that they know, the chances are it's going to stick because you've bridged that gap they thought was vacant. And there is a thread in there. There is like a fishing hook that's in there that people start to contemplate. Now they can react to it and fight, and that's also another potential. But as people fight, if pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth, that's what it takes often to get people to the point they start looking at things in a way that are a lot more inclusive rather than exclusive.
The permission to let the story dissolve.
Yeah. So like the,
Consider it doesn't even exist.
yeah, we were talking earlier about the lie. Its biggest enemy is the truth. It wants to. The lie doesn't want the truth to appear. So when the truth appears, if the truth carries the results of that truth will give, it results in your life or the speaker's, the bringer of truth's life, the person who's living in the lie and their results are so vastly different. They'll look over and see those results that you're getting and go like, well, I wouldn't mind having that result. Maybe I should consider the truth. Maybe I should consider that point of view, which I don't yet see as the truth, because I like that result. And I think what we bring a lot as we recover and as we go forward in understanding is that we bring that the results of living in a light or living in the truth. And not all of us are out in the bright sunlight, but at least we're beginning to become aware of the of enlightenment. We are becoming lighter, enlightened, and people recognize that. People, especially who are heavily burdened, recognize a person who has lightened up, and actually will invite a lightened up person to come, if for no other reason than to try to give them the load, which they can't possibly do. But
Good point. Good point.
My sense is attraction is a vacuum where we haven't made things matter so much that they burden us and everyone else. It's literally the vacancy of that space. It's that openness. It's that welcoming. And the law of attraction is actually drawing people into what's real rather than not real. To another point on truth and the fight for it and all that, Ty, and this may help you too, is that a lie only exists as long as it's thought to be true. If I'm busy thinking the lie is true, I am busy thinking truth is false. So thinking about anything true would be insane to me in the mental capacity I'm now in, because I'm busy maintaining the idea that what isn't true is true. A lie only exists as long as it's thought to be true. And as soon as a lie is a lie, it no longer exists. There's nothing there. Absolutely nothing. So think of this. A lie only claims to be the opposite of what it is. If something claims to be the opposite of what it isn't anything. It's claiming to be not what it is. It's telling us openly, there's nothing here. But the defense of what's happening, does it appear to be in our own experience? That's all. We're defending it because what's it going to tell us? You let me go and I'm going to kill you. You let me go and you're in trouble. This is a hostage thinking if they get out, they're going to be worse off. Think of the insanity of that thinking. It's crazy. To subject ourselves to that 24 hours a day. And I would say we have largely been thinking thoughts as reality and truth rather than a byproduct of reality and truth, and perfectly capable of manifesting great things. But many of the great things we've claimed to manifest have led to problems much greater than the things we thought we solved. But it took 10 years or 20 years to notice it. So during all those times, we were in that pink cloud thinking it hasn't happened yet and everything's wonderful. It's the same thing we do in our own experience. Everything's fine because nothing's bothering me. And as long as I'm not bothered, I'm fine. And the fact is we have a yearning for an inspired adventure of life and a fullness that we absolutely can't deny because we're too full of it, and a satisfaction that is impossible not to notice. And there's no story there's no excuse for it because it's just happening. There's no then and there in it because it's now, because it is actually the nature of life and what we've been given. And it's beginning to express it. I don't need to think about reality and truth accurately to express reality and truth. Because intuition, by its definition, is knowledge beyond reason, which means it doesn't include thinking or understanding at all.
It's just that knowing, that ever-present knowing, right?
Yeah, and as I use the insight I have about my thinking it's real and true, I think I'm blocking that thing, which I've never blocked at all. I've just created such a damning impression to my experience that it's all I thought about is what's wrong and how do I fix what's wrong and how do other people stop it and how do I get away from them? And I've been so busy with that, I haven't stopped to say, like in your meditation, oh, there's something else going on here that's pretty profound. Wow, what's profound? For finding. What am I doing when I'm looking at something and using it as an excuse not to change and not to grow and not to want to hear? I'm not for finding at all. I'm for losing. I'm for not looking, so I'm not going to see. And what am I going to see? Everything that justifies what I'm thinking to continue to maintain the seeming gravy train of the insanity.
I don't think there's anything to defend anymore, and it's a
There
beautiful
isn't.
it's a beautiful space to be in, and it saves not only words that I would have wasted before, but thoughts and the story of the thoughts. Because I think before I felt like to interact with other humans, and now that I have a more spacious awareness or an expansion that we're all inclusive, there's a lot less dialogue. Like I have a shaman here visiting that we're going to do a sober sweat in a couple of days, and he's been doing this for 30 years, and he's helped millions and millions of people get sober and stuff. And we have so much less dialogue than I thought we would. We hung out all day yesterday, and there just wasn't
a knowing nature is not only invisible, but it's also silent. It has nothing to say because it isn't thinking. It's just a knowing of knowing. It's an awareness of awareness.
And no defending.
What's that?
No defending.
Yeah, it's like defending yourself against air. Think of that as a good metaphor. You're going to fight air. I hate air. I got to get the air away from me. What are you going to look like? Like a crazy person punching into the middle of nothing, right? But we could have that thought, and we're welcome to it. To talk about it seems absurd, but it is no more absurd than the thoughts we take so seriously as to make believe our life depends on them in any way, at any time.
And I haven't felt like I had to create any stories of impressiveness or, you know what I mean? I thought that I would feel less aware than I do. I thought there would be a chasm where he was here and I was here, and that I would want to show him how aware. And it's not. It's that neutrality that I always tell you, because I'm an addict. I want the parade, and the parade's not happening. It's a neutral, calm, completely neutral experience, and it's so beautiful. So grateful.
Well, that knowingness is neutral because there is no choice in it. It's just a present state of being that always is. It isn't a coming and going. It isn't a there and then. It isn't anything other than a here and now. Even to us, it's not here and now to it because it isn't in space and time. It's here and now to us. Most of the dimensions that are even recognized by humans today are well beyond space and time, which means that space and time is included in that infinite nature. And it's fairly well recognized that as you go beyond the fourth dimension, which is space and time, the fifth starts being a seamless unity, and the sixth starts being this infinite number of possibilities on a six-dimensional basis. And that's just six. And I think they're at 11, 12, 13 or something in terms of the common understanding. But I would also suggest, just like with love and anything real, it's already doing what it's doing right now for it to be anything at all. Right now, all of the complications that haven't been figured out by humans, all we're really trying to do is capitalize on them in some commercial way by understanding them, so we can pose a greater threat to people by keeping what we discover away from them when it's at intuitively what is all of ours. We're not operating on the basis of reality and truth. We're operating under this devised sort of scheme of I get and you don't, and I want more of what you have, and I might as well kill you and then I'll get it all. And all that stuff seems to make sense within that insanity. It doesn't make sense at all.
Brings those little sparks that we really truly are connected, and I really do think beyond me, as in cumulatively, it's all, I don't know, we were just talking about it yesterday, floating in the waterfall, and it was just like, it's true that we're all connected, but no one felt like, we felt like we wanted inclusively everyone to be raised up, like raise the vibe for everybody, so that it's almost like we're responsible for all of it. And
that is the fact, whether we think we are or not.
Right, exactly.
So
but
beginning to notice that sort of gives thinking the day off.
Yes.
You can
and then there's so many less words. There's just not a
Well,
lot of dialogue.
think about the contemplation. What are you going to say about something that's so profoundly absolute that it doesn't change? There's nothing to say but sort of go. It's like awe. It's just a witnessing of something we can't make any sense of it. So sense falls apart, and all of a sudden we don't need to, because the awareness of it becomes very obvious.
And to be inclusive, anyone's invited to the Sober Sweat. All you have to do is catch a plane. I've got a bedroom and a bathroom, and I'll pick you up at the airport. Seriously.
I'll be there, but I'll be 2 months late. I'm coming in August.
So this was very good today, and I appreciate you all hanging in there. I know that some of this can be confrontive to things that seem awkward, because facing things we think we're not doing always seems a little bit odd. And yet, I'm not pigeonholing anyone into making believe that I know for you what you're doing. I'm simply suggesting that if you're looking clearly, you're going to look at the effects as the cause and start to see that they're not, effects don't happen without a cause, and yet they always happen with a cause. So they're always going to be attached.
How's that for scenery?
What's that?
How's that for scenery? I'm at the Windsor Castle for this huge concert right now. That's the grounds.
I think it's way too much grass to mow for a person that's having financial issues.
Is that incredible? Wow, spiritual. I love you guys. I really got a lot out of this meeting. So thank you. I was thinking in my head, there's nothing they're going to talk about. I need to. There's nothing there. I know it. Then Pierre got on there and started the greatest discussion. It was just great. So good job.
I'm glad you reminded him of us, Anthony.
He reminded me. I kind of had the time. I was an hour off, but look at how beautiful that is. The sun. My God, have you guys ever seen anything like that?
That grass should be vegetables.
Imagine if this is your house. You're like, yeah, I'm home. Where's the food at?
Anthony, if it was your house, it would barely be enough. So,
hey, I got to tell you, there's this biggest concert with Andrea Bocelli and everybody going to be here. I just totally snuck in right now. They don't have any security. I mean, nobody gets this far just on the idea that they're going to sneak in. So it's going to be like Katy Perry's playing, Andrea Bocelli, Lionel Richie.
Oh, Lionel and Katie, how fun. It's going to be lovely.
Good morning, sir.
Oh, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
he doesn't belong there.
He snuck in. He's not the king.
So
it's so funny. Nobody even asked for a ticket at all. Just because who the hell would ever come here?
wrapping up, I want to tell everyone that I appreciate you being here very much. I appreciate you listening and participating and sharing and challenging. You know, it's good to be challenged, and good opportunity to explore things that I might not think about mentioning or saying. There is an intuitive nature that becomes obvious as we begin discussing this together, because everyone begins to reinforce things that we might not have thought we were even thinking. And that enlightenment becomes obvious of this connected nature. And the interaction becomes, rather than interreaction in these ideas we have about what shouldn't be happening, it becomes an inviting interaction of what interrelations are about, and actually relating to what's happening rather than relating to what's not happening and wondering why we're having problems in our relationships.
Don't you think our interactions cumulatively, the 10 or 8 of us or however many, are so much more open and aware than previously?
Yes, I think we've come, if there's a place to come to, we have come to that place, but we've always been in it. And now we're getting better at actually just talking about it and starting to actually look at it in ways that are less story-centric and more present-centric. And that's the goal here, is to start noticing that we can have a conversation about everything and leave after 2 hours with an experience of having discussed things well beyond the bounds we might think are troublesome during the week, and begin to actually be able to stop in the face of the thoughts we might have that condemn what's happening or seem to, and start to be embracing of it and start to say, this is my textbook for the day. This is my learning. I'm in college. I'm on a campus. And this is a chance for me to see with perspective what I'm unwilling to see. I can't see my own thoughts. And my thinking about itself is trying to make a single point, and there's no dimension to a single point. You need at least 2 points to begin to actually fool with dimension. And if you think about what the universe seemed to be before it became what it is, it was a singular point. So apparently singular points want to go outward rather than further inward. Apparently there's a point at which it becomes so explosive that if we keep trying, we're going to do things violently and explosively rather than collectively and inclusively. So the expansion is just beginning to contemplate and then begin to realize that forever, if forever takes forever, then you could wait forever for forever and still have forever to wait. That can't be it. It must be that what's present is present and infinite and absolute. And what we have is that thing we keep looking for. And to make that single point, it can't be made because in an infinite space, there's no mathematics at all. There are no points, there are no places, there are no things, none of it. Just an absolute state of being. And I can't imagine it's depressing because it wouldn't have any weight. Like light, think about light. We can get burned by it, but it never seems too much to bear. Maybe in the Sahara, it seems that way, but it's basically just baking the people.
No more holding our breath, like thinking that that next thing is going to make everything okay. It's okay. It just is. In the infinite source, everything is. I say that a lot. Like if I start thinking weird or things seem shadowed somehow, I go, you know what? It's okay. No matter what it is, it's just okay. And that's a huge relief. I like the parade. I'm not conjuring up the want for a parade.
Jack, out of
Thanks,
here.
Kai, very much for your thoughts and input. A lot.
Thanks, you guys.
That was an awesome day. Thank you
Thanks,
so
Doug.
much.
Jackie, good to see your cheerleading outfit and your knee pads.
See you next week, guys.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Good to
Bye.
see
Good to
everybody.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Enjoy the concert, Anthony.
Yeah, thanks. It's fucking Black Peas are on right now. It's gonna be a good night.
Are you dancing? Look at him. He's all happy.
But the Beatles aren't playing.
Oh, wouldn't that be something?
Love you guys.
Love you.
Love you.